In this chapter, we'll explore the city as a site of human meaning. There are two books that I use with teaching courses on ethnic studies as well as the evolution of cities. Introduction to Cities by Jianming Chen, Anthony Orum, and Krista Paulson is an excellent resource for understanding a historical orientation to the city. And another book that I've often used is by Dr. Mindy Thompson Fullilove, which gained notoriety in the early 2000s. Root Shock, which is based on her groundbreaking work of what upheaval does to communities and residents due to urban renewal, gentrification, and even other natural events. Cities are concentrations of people and buildings. They're also places that contain specific places. There's no better time to take a picture of the city than at the rooftop of a barbecue party. In this photo, I remember Kansas City as a place with special meaning to me. Being on top of a rooftop gave the perfect opportunity to take a great photo of the city and, of course, of what it symbolizes even in the Midwest. Similarly, Central Park is a specific site in a city that many people feel attached to. They have an emotional bond with that place and also a sense of their own personal identity in relation to that place. Cities help us put our lives in order. They also help us to find focus. I want to start with a couple of definitions. Space is what we talk about in geographic terms as entities with distinct shapes, scales, and other properties that set the stage for certain kinds of human activities and interactions. Place has more to do with those specific sites, like Central Park, or like standing on top of a rooftop, and shape the lives of human beings. These places are sites of human activity, security, and community. And of course, cities are places. They are the places where we find meaning, we find identity, we find community and security. And that identity speaks to the connection that we have to a place, where we are from, geographically, culturally, socially, economically, and ideologically. In community, we find that we come together in spaces where we develop social cohesion and social capital. And we find that being in those places gives us a sense of security, of connectedness, of stability, a sense of safety, of belonging to place. This aerial view is one of the key ways in which planners think of cities and think of places like Chicago or Kansas City. However, I knew about the power of place many years ago when I was introduced to Dolores Hayden and her work on, of course, the power of place. In preface to that book, Dr. Hayden says, "The city is a place where people of different backgrounds, cultures, identities, all converge to live out their day-to-day lives." Dolores Hayden authored a book of the same title called The Power of Place, and it is a scholarly idea that has been elaborated on by many. She wrote it based on her experience in the urban neighborhoods of Los Angeles as a way to connect space to place, and that place to the residents. Often, these places wouldn't be much without the residents. For example, what would New Orleans be without being the birthplace of jazz? What would Memphis be without B.B. King? Although his blues museum is in Indianola, Mississippi. Of course, I have to say something about Kansas City. What would Kansas City be without jazz, without the Blue Room, without the American Jazz Museum, without the people who make that place what it is? For example, John Batiste. I had the awesome opportunity to work with John Batiste and his manager when he was a recipient of the 2017 Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Jazz Museum. And no one can come to Kansas City and not know who Lonnie McFadden is, pictured here on this image in the right. He's tap dancing on top of a bar table. These cities have become places that give us all a sense of meaning and purpose. And I feel attached to Kansas City, for example, for much more than its amazing views, but because of the history that's rooted in various cultural constellations as an African American. Dr. Clara Arasabo and Ramsey Farat examined placemaking, for example, for Latino communities in the United States. And they use 4 threads of analysis. They use the analysis of space, culture, economics, and governance. However, I do agree that we are at risk of losing that which matters most to us in the places where we live. We are isolating more because we're spending much more time on our electronic devices and not enough time in green open spaces. I also agree with the Trust for Public Land that we are losing touch with the things and the people that matter to us at the individual and the social level. The work of the Trust for Public Land, for example, is connection. And they say we are at risk because we're losing our connection to each other and not just to place. Cities are the locus of profound environmental changes, and they are the locus of social problems. Social problems are often more pronounced in cities, although it does not mean that smaller places do not experience social problems. On June 3rd, 2020, for example, we see there was protest in the city of Seattle after the death of George Floyd. In Kansas City, Missouri, we've seen in recent months, we've seen protests around gun violence and also reproductive rights. And about a year ago, we saw Washington, D.C. as the place of unrest and political upheaval. Our cities are threatened by natural events like COVID. In this before and after picture, for example, we could see the city of Los Angeles before COVID and after COVID. Therefore, it tells us how much our use of our automobiles are affecting our places. We have something to contribute to the places in which we live in many different ways. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina devastated the city of New Orleans. It was destructive to the tune of over $125 billion in damage, and it was the third and strongest hurricane to make landfall in the history of the United States. Dr. Mindy Thompson-Fuller-Love gave us something to think about when it comes to places and how those places lose meaning for us or they gain meaning. Sometimes places lose meaning, and that term by Dr. Fuller-Love is root shock. Dr. Fuller-Love says, to heal race-based fractures in U.S., we have to find ways to make connection. Root shock is a profound emotional upheaval that destroys the working model of the world that existed in the individual's head. With this definition, we understand more about the ripple effect that urban renewal had upon the residents in Boston and many other places throughout the United States. We also know that people experience root shock when there's great violence, unexpected gun violence. Here, a photo of Tops grocery store, which was recently in the news. Root shock undermines trust. It increases anxiety. It destabilizes relationships and destroys social, emotional, and financial resources. We experience root shock even when there are efforts to gentrify an area. And this increases the risk of every kind of stress-related disease, depression, heart attack, for example. Root shock leaves people chronically cranky, barking a distinctively croaky complaint, says Dr. Fuller-Love. Root shock is something that we must all be aware of and know how to solve it. According to Dr. Fuller-Love, to heal a city, you must mend its fractures. She notes that traumatic stress is a reaction to the loss of a community's multifamily and intergenerational social networks previously built up as emotional and social ecosystems. Her call to action to address root shock is to make connections. To envision a different future, Dr. Fullilove suggests that we learn how to do many things differently. We learn how to acknowledge everyone's suffering, including our own. How to find the stories about ourselves in others. How to invite everyone to be on our committee, even teenagers. She urges us to not be afraid to name the problems or flaws about our community and to think forward about what we're doing and what we're promoting. These are the ideas given to us by Dr. Fullilove so that we can start to create new possibilities in the places where we love.